If you can find a quiet place and settle in with me for a moment. This is a story from Manchester in the early 1950s, a city still catching its breath after the war. Streets bore the marks of bomb damage, families lived with rationing, and life moved slowly through weariness and quiet endurance. As you watch these old images on your screen, they may not match every word, but they carry the true spirit of that time. If this kind of memory speaks to you, consider subscribing to Tube Euro Retro and sharing this journey with someone who remembers. There was a weight in the air in those years, something people did not just see but felt in their lungs and in their bones. The smog, often called the pea soup fog, would settle over Manchester so thick that daylight could disappear without warning. Lamps glowed at midday, and figures moved slowly through the streets with scarves pulled tight across their faces, as if the city itself was holding its breath. For many, sunlight was not a daily companion, but a distant memory. The smoke from coal fires and factory chimneys clung to every surface, darkening walls and windows, seeping into homes no matter how tightly they were shut. It was not only an inconvenience, it carried a quiet danger. Respiratory illness was common, especially among children and the elderly, and the air itself felt heavy with harm. And yet, even in that dim and choking atmosphere, people carried on. There was a quiet resilience in how life continued beneath those darkened skies. It would take until the Clean Air Act of 1956 for real change to begin, when at last there was hope that the fog would lift and that Manchester might one day see its sunlight return. Away from the city centre, life unfolded in the narrow streets of Hume, Moss Side and Longsight, where rows of terraced houses stood shoulder to shoulder, worn but full of life. If you had walked there in those days, you would have noticed how close everything felt, not just the buildings, but the people. Doors were rarely strangers to one another, and voices carried easily from one home to the next. Children made their world out of whatever surrounded them. They played among rubble left behind by demolition and war damage, turning broken bricks and empty lots into places of adventure. There was a kind of freedom in those streets that feels distant now, where imagination filled the gaps left by hardship, and laughter echoed even in the most unlikely corners. Daily routines were simple, but deeply familiar. The wash house was more than a place to clean clothes. It was where conversations flowed and friendships were quietly strengthened. Corner shops knew their customers by name, and the local chippy offered small comforts at the end of long days. These were not grand moments, but they were steady ones, woven into the rhythm of everyday life. What stayed with people most was the closeness. Everyone seemed to know everyone, not in passing, but in a way that carried care and responsibility. Neighbors watched out for one another, shared what little they had, and stood together through both ordinary days and difficult times. It was a life shaped by limitation, yet filled with a kind of human warmth that many still remember with quiet longing. Money was often in short supply in those years, and for many families, getting through the week required quiet negotiation and trust. Groceries were frequently bought on tick, a simple system of credit where the shopkeeper would note down what was owed, trusting it would be settled when wages came in. It was not just a transaction, it was a relationship built over time, one that carried both dignity and unspoken understanding. Mondays had their own familiar rhythm. For some, it meant a visit to the pawnbroker, a place people simply called Pops. Small belongings, a watch, a coat, sometimes even wedding rings, were handed over in exchange for just enough money to manage the days ahead. By the end of the week, if luck allowed, those items would be reclaimed. It was a cycle many knew well, carried out quietly, without complaint. Between the rows of houses ran narrow passages known as ginnels. These spaces, often dim and enclosed, became the heart of childhood games. Children pressed themselves against wooden gates, holding their breath in games of hide and seek, hoping not to be found. In those moments, the weight of adult worries seemed far away. Life was not easy, and there was no pretending otherwise. Yet there was a warmth that endured within it all. People shared what they could, looked out for one another, and found small ways to carry on. Even in hardship, there was a sense that no one truly stood alone, and that quiet strength is what many still remember most. In the 1950s, Manchester quietly became a place of new beginnings for many who had travelled far from the Caribbean and West Africa. They arrived with suitcases in hand and hope carried deep within them, part of what is now remembered as the Windrush generation. For many, the promise was simple and powerful: the chance to build a better life in a country they had been taught to call home. But the reality they met was often far more difficult than expected. The cold air, the unfamiliar streets, and the heavy silence of a city still recovering from war could feel overwhelming. Many found themselves settling in areas like Moss Side, renting rooms in large houses that had once belonged to more prosperous families. Life was shared closely, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of comfort. Each morning, some would board the number 53 bus, a route that came to be known among them as the African Queen, carrying workers toward Trafford Park or the docks at Salford. It was a short journey in distance, but for many, it marked the beginning of long and demanding days in factories and industrial yards. There was strength in their presence, even when the welcome they received was uncertain. They brought with them culture, resilience, and a quiet determination to belong, shaping the city in ways that would only be fully understood many years later. For many who arrived with hope, the reality of daily life also brought quiet hardship. Racial discrimination was not always spoken aloud, but it was felt in small, persistent ways. Opportunities were limited, wages were often lower than expected, and advancement could seem just out of reach, no matter how hard a person worked. It created a kind of pressure that was carried silently through long days and even longer nights. And yet, something remarkable grew within that struggle. People turned toward one another out of necessity and trust. They formed what were known as partners, small savings groups where each person contributed what they could, helping one another build stability, pay for homes, or support family back home. It was not just financial support. It was a shared belief that no one should have to face life alone. In the evenings and on weekends, homes came alive with house parties. These gatherings were more than celebration, they were a refuge. Music filled the rooms, food was shared, and for a few hours, the weight of the outside world seemed to lift. Laughter returned, and with it, a sense of belonging. Even in the face of exclusion, a strong and enduring community took root. It was built on care, resilience, and a quiet solidarity that continues to echo through Manchester's story today. If there was one thing that brought the people of Manchester together in those years, it was football. It was more than a game. It was something deeply felt, something that gave pride to a city that had endured so much. And at the heart of that pride stood a young team known as the Busby Babes, guided by manager Matt Busby. They were talented, full of life, and carried the hopes of an entire community every time they stepped onto the pitch. But in February of 1958, everything changed. On their journey home from a European match in Belgrade, the team's plane attempted to take off from Munich in difficult weather conditions. The aircraft failed to gain lift and crashed beyond the runway. In that moment, a bright future was suddenly taken away. 23 people lost their lives, including 8 players whose promise had captured the imagination of so many. When the news reached Manchester, it was as if the whole city fell silent. People stopped where they stood, unable to fully take in what had happened. The grief was not limited to supporters of one club. It was shared across streets, across families, across the entire city. Rivalries no longer mattered. There was only a deep and collective sorrow. Among those lost was Duncan Edwards, a young man many believed would become one of the greatest players the game had ever seen. He fought for his life for several days before passing, and his loss was felt not only for what he had achieved, but for everything he might have become. Even now, many remember not just the tragedy, but the feeling of that time, the sense of unity, the quiet tears, and the way a city came together in mourning. It remains one of the most painful chapters in Manchester's history, and one that is still carried in the hearts of those who remember. And yet, even in a city shaped by hardship and loss, there were moments when life felt lighter, almost luminous. Entertainment offered a kind of escape, a brief but meaningful step away from the weight of everyday struggles. For many families, Christmas brought a special kind of magic. Pantomimes filled local theatres with laughter, familiar stories, and a sense of warmth that stayed with people long after the curtains closed. At Bellevue, the circus became something unforgettable. Crowds gathered to watch performances that felt almost otherworldly. The sight of lions and tigers, the voice of the ringmaster, and the shared excitement in the air created memories that would be carried for a lifetime. It was not just spectacle, it was wonder in its purest form. And for the younger generation, something new began to stir. The arrival of rock and roll brought a different kind of energy into Manchester. Music grew louder, rhythms faster, and dance floors filled with movement and laughter. Young people found freedom in those moments, spinning and jiving with a sense of joy that felt both new and deeply needed. In those spaces, whether under circus lights or on crowded dance floors, people rediscovered something essential. Even after sorrow, there was still room for happiness, for connection, and for the simple act of feeling alive. As the decade moved forward, you could feel something shifting quietly beneath the surface, especially among the young. In places like the Plaza Ballroom near St. Peter's Square, a new kind of energy began to take hold. It was not loud in the beginning, but it was unmistakable. Young men and women gathered there during their breaks, stepping away from work and responsibility, if only for a short while. Music played a central role in that change. Records spun, rhythms carried through the room, and bodies moved in ways that felt fresh and alive. A young DJ named Jimmy Savile became known for hosting these sessions, bringing together crowds eager for something different, something that belonged to them. There was a sense of freedom in those hours that many had not felt before. Shoes were kicked off, laughter came easily, and for a moment, the future seemed wide open. It was not about forgetting the past, but about creating space for something new. For those who were there, it was more than dancing. It was a quiet turning point, a moment when youth found its voice, and when Manchester began to feel the first rhythms of a changing world. As the years moved on, much of that old Manchester slowly disappeared. Streets were cleared, familiar homes were replaced, and the shape of the city began to change in ways few could have imagined. And yet, even as the buildings faded, the memories did not. They live on in quiet stories, in shared moments, and in the spirit of the people who endured and carried on. For me, this is not just history. It feels like something deeply human and close. I often wonder how it feels for you watching this. Does it bring back something familiar, or perhaps a sense of a time you wish you had known? This video is built from real historical sources, with no intention to divide, only to remember and reflect. If it meant something to you, I would truly appreciate you subscribing to Tubular Retro, liking and sharing this video so more people can experience these memories. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And until next time, take care, and I will see you in the next video.